Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and welcome to the Developing Financial Management Leaders Forum for the 21st Century. I'm Lyle Davis, and working in SAF FM Workforce Management. Prior to introducing our distinguished speaker today, I have several administrative comments. First, today's presentation will be videotaped and broadcasted to all MAGCOMs live via the Defense Connect online. So I would ask you to please remove your badges and silence all your electronic devices. The video recording will be posted to SAF FMPW's Community of Practice for your future usage. Second, for the auditorium audience, during our Q&A session, please wait until you have a microphone to ask your questions, and this will ensure that we can record everything through the microphone. DCO participants will be able to submit questions through the online chat capability. Without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce our speaker today, the Honorable Dr. Jamie M. Morin, Assistant Secretary for the Air Force in Financial Management and Comptroller. Dr. Morin's impressive career began with his education from Georgetown University, where he earned his Bachelor's of Science degree. He received his Master's degree from the London Business School of Economics and his Doctorate in Political Science from Yale University. He has held many distinguished positions in his career, including work as an economic development consultant and strategy specialist for J.E. Austin Associates, an intern for the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense in Policy, a visiting fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, and a national fellow in public affairs at the Miller Center for Public Affairs. Prior to his current position, he was the senior defense analyst for the U.S. Senate Committee on the Budget from 2003 until May of this year. He is a member of the following organizations: American Society of Military Comptrollers, Council of Foreign Relations, and the Air Force Association. We are honored and pleased to have him here with us today. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to the Honorable Dr. Jamie M. Morin.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I noted that I was introduced as distinguished. He didn't specify in what way I was distinguished, which I think is safe. I'm glad to be here and glad to have a chance to chat with you all. This is, I think, a very useful series of events that we have in order to allow people to reflect on their careers, to provide some guidance. I had a chance in preparing for this speech to look back at remarks by Ms. White-Olson, who has just departed Air Force FM for other things, and also Pat Z, who gave a great speech last year. I'm hopeful that I can provide something that's even close to as useful as those talks. Obviously, the background I bring as I come to the role of SAF FM is a little different than that of someone who's made a career in federal executive service. One of the wonderful things about being appointed to a job like this is the opportunity to talk in detail and learn from people who have worked their way through the federal bureaucracy or military service from the earliest moments of their career up to senior positions of great responsibility. I don't have that same background, and if you were seeking to design your own career plan, I would not recommend that you build it on mine. It'd be a bit of a roll of the dice. And frankly, rolling the dice is not what we're generally looking for when we're hiring comptrollers, particularly not with the O&M budget. But there are some useful lessons, and I also have some thoughts about workforce development and career progression for people across the career field, based mainly on what I've learned in interacting with folks in this career field, and also some observations from previous periods in my career when I was working on the legislative side and dealing with a lot of the finest top civilian and military officials that the Air Force has to offer. But it's a good opportunity for me. A good opportunity for me because it allowed me to focus some of my thoughts on workforce development and career progression issues, and also a good opportunity just to underscore some of the key priorities that I think face Air Force financial managers as we look at a very uncertain but promising future. So those are, it's also, I should mention, a great chance to talk to people through the magic of the internet around the world in Air Force financial management, and I'm frightened to learn stored for all posterity on the web as well. That's very dangerous stuff. But, you know, in a little over 6 months in this job, I've had the opportunity to really dig into a handful of key issues for Air Force financial management. And you've heard me, many of you, talk about these before, but number one among them is keeping the promises we've made for Air Force financial services transformation. Number two is enabling acquisition excellence through providing the best possible cost and economic information to our acquisition community. And number three of these internal priorities is developing and empowering the Air Force financial management workforce. Those are two closely related but separate parts, developing and empowering. We have organizations that are very good at building people's skills, checking blocks off on a resume list, but that do not respect the value of those skills in the decision-making process. Similarly, there's organizations that put immense power, immense influence in the hands of the workforce, but don't give them the tools needed to make the right decision, make successful decisions. We need to do both. And it's not just a matter of making sure you and your folks are able to check the blocks and get the training required, but also an opportunity to ensure that you respect the value that's added by that and really trust in the judgment of people who've been given the right skills. Now, most of the presentations I have the opportunity to make in this job don't allow for as much give and take as I'd like. And so I'm going to try and keep my remarks this afternoon to about 15 or 20 minutes and then reserve the remainder of the time for questions. But I have to confess, those of you that have had other opportunities to listen to me pontificate, I do occasionally run a little bit over. So if spitballs start to emerge from the audience or anything like that, I'll take that as my cue. But I will say I also have some questions to ask you and look forward to getting answers from you. And hopefully people are raring to go to answer any questions I pose, and I don't have to select Mr. Hartley to answer all of them. You might not like how that comes out. Let me start by talking about workforce development, and talked about that for maybe 5 minutes or so, which means 10. I think that we have pretty good plans that have been published over the last few years that deal with the key challenges of Air Force financial management workforce development. We've got roadmaps out there for the enlisted force, for the officer force, for the civilian technical force, for the civilian generalist managerial force. And all of those offer people a sense of how they can progress through their career from one assignment to another through increasing responsibility. The increasing responsibility is obviously deeply ingrained into the enlisted and officer force. The civilian force, we have a variety of paths. Some people come in and serve with distinction in a single role for their entire career and perform vital service. Others, maybe because they're willing to be mobile or looking for continual increase in responsibility, serve short periods in a variety of roles and move up and move out and broaden themselves. I think all those paths to service are valuable, and I think it's a mistake to denigrate any of them. Sometimes we do make a mistake, I think, in the Department of Defense as a whole in devoting all of our resources when it comes to training, when it comes to development, when it comes to travel, when it comes to a whole variety of things like that, to the 10 or 20% of the workforce that has either self-selected or been selected for bigger and better things. I don't think that's entirely satisfactory because the organization will rise or fall with the efforts of the entirety. And that remaining 90 or 80% needs to have opportunities to be the best they can be as well. Because the reality is that management and senior leadership can only do so much to identify good ideas, can only do so much to re-vector. The best ideas most often come from the working level. That's a key insight in continuous process improvement. That's a key insight in lean thinking. And it's an insight that applies in our business as well. So we need to make sure that people who are perfectly content continuing to do roughly the same job they have now, are not looking to move, are still given opportunities to contribute. Now that's, what I'm talking about here is not a complete shift. I'm not saying all of our workforce development should be concentrated on those who are staying in place. But I'm saying right now, we probably err a little too much on the side of focusing resources rather than spreading them out a bit so that we raise the baseline for performance across the board. When I talk about a priority of developing FM professionals, a priority of developing the workforce, that means an environment that encourages continuous learning at all levels and across that entire 100% of the workforce. It means generalists and specialists. It means civilians and military. And it means a focus on raising the level of organizational performance as a whole, not the level of any specific subgroup. We have distributed leadership in this organization. As the functional authority for financial management, I can touch a number of buttons, but there are commanders in the field that are directly supervising financial managers. There are folks in other career fields that are drawing on FM personnel and managing them on a day-to-day basis. And we need to make sure that everybody, all of those needs are taken into account. I've been talking recently, after having some opportunities to travel out in the field, talk to people primarily in the enlisted force and in base level financial management organizations on the civilian side, about the promise of financial services transformation, about the future of the workforce, about decision support, a whole series of issues related to that. And one thing that's been clear to me as I've had those conversations and as I've looked out at some of the results that we've delivered, particularly on the financial services transformation side, is that we need to maintain a focus on the basics. I have a sense that over the last several years, we've been perhaps a little too enamored of the exciting future. Taking the financial management career field solidly over to issues of decision support and things like that. That is still an important long-term perspective, but the reality is we live in the immediate. We live in the short term. We've got a plan for the future, but we can't take our eye off the ball for what we need to do today. And unfortunately, many of the systems that we're going to make the transactional, the processing nature of the FM workforce obsolete, have not delivered. And so the reality of today is that we've got to make the system work. And that means that people need to focus on the basic blocking and tackling. I'm talking about people at base level, and I'm also talking about people at the headquarters level. First is still second at best, maybe last. We've got a long way to go on the systems front, and until we get there, and frankly, even after we do get there, people need to be able to do the basic blocking and tackling, the ABC of financial management. Those parts of the business are not obsolete. I'm using the phrase back to basics plus. And the plus part is in line with what I've been saying about focusing on developing the entire workforce. The plus part is embracing continuous process improvement. The plus part is embracing the idea that the workforce can come up with great ideas to improve our processes. And what that means is not only do people have to have the skills they need in order to get their job done, they also have to have the skills they need to analyze how they can do their job better in the future. And that is something that that is worked into a lot of our training, but not all of it. And we can do better there. As we get back to basics in the finance world, that means eliminating 3 R's, re-input, reconciliation, and rework. All of those are, in the terminology of lean thinking, waste. They're redoing things that you could have got done right the first time. The reality is, as I look at FM-wide metrics, as I look at things like the number of Anti-Deficiency Act cases that we are currently working, we are not getting those basic parts of our job right as consistently as we need to. And we have fiduciary obligations that are not going to go away. I think that as we try and balance both the back to basics and the plus, both the by the book and the continuous process improvement, that has to tie very closely with this notion that people will, given the proper incentives, given the proper training, more often than not, do what is asked of them. But we don't always ask enough, and we don't always ask in the right ways. There are many paths to service. There's many paths to contributing to national security. If we provide the right environment, the right training, and respect people's contributions and give them opportunities to succeed, they will seize that more often than not. But what does it mean to give them the opportunities they need to succeed? Well, training is a big part of it. And when we talk about training, we typically think about formal schoolhouse type events. But we also need to think seriously, and I address this to everybody, we need to think very seriously about the many distance learning and other training opportunities that we have. We've got home station training for people throughout the country in all levels of operation. We've got some incredible web-based training resources out there. And we have a workforce right now, particularly on the military side, both enlisted and officers, where we have bulges of folks in the career field who are very new. We're seeing that at a squadron level, where we have squadron commanders who are often on their third assignment, fourth assignment. We've got superintendents who are fairly new. And we've got 3-level enlisted manning and financial service offices and other operations at base level that is through the roof. That creates big training demands, that creates big management demands, but it means that we've got an opportunity. We've got an incredible opportunity here because we are building the workforce of the future, and we have a whole bunch of fresh minds, a whole bunch of fresh sets of ideas. And the habits that are inculcated, the skills that are conveyed now will shape the next 20, 30 years of Air Force financial management. So it's critically important that we get it right. This is an environment that we operate in that is sometimes struggles to balance the challenges of directed training, directed opportunity, and individual responsibility. People need to have the guidance about what is expected if they want to get ahead. People need to have the guidance about what is necessary to get the mission done. But we also need to expect people to take charge of their own lives, take charge of their own careers. And so, you think about an example like PME. We have ongoing dialogue over the role of PME, of the amount of resources that should be put to it. But the reality is today, if you're looking to get ahead in this career field, you're going to be expected at appropriate times in your career to take advantage of PME. It gives you an incredible broadening exposure to the sort of challenges the Air Force as a whole and the national security establishment as a whole face that you won't get in day-to-day life. You won't get in on-the-job training. And there's a reason that we look for those sorts of skills in people that are rising to higher levels, because you need to have that broader perspective. So, again, you look at things like participation rate in distance learning courses, participation in the many web resources we have, and people's decisions to devote some of their time to that tell you something about what they're looking for. One of the virtues, I think, of a lot of the technology that is available to us today is it facilitates really two-way flow of information. It's not just me speaking, getting recorded, having a video file placed on the internet. It's the opportunity for dialogue. We're going to have a chat room with questions being posed and hopefully answers to questions being posed here today. Where we sometimes fail in the Air Force is in crushing good ideas. We also sometimes fail in grabbing what looks like a good idea and rushing headlong into it and having some unintended consequences. Putting those together, what we need is an ability to identify best practices, whether it's in the field or at a MAGCOM budget office or here on the headquarters, institutionalizing those best practices after vetting them to really make sure what the unintended consequences might be. Again, that's a continuous process improvement type notion. That's a notion of grabbing ideas and creating standard work where possible. It can really drive efficiency, but it's hard to do, and it requires, frankly, just sustained attention from leaders at every level. Let me, having talked about some of these big picture workforce issues, and hopefully not put too many people to sleep, and I will warn all of you, having watched some of these sessions on the web now, they do occasionally cut away to the audience, and while I can't say it would not be career enhancing to be asleep right now, it might not be my first recommendation if I was in a decision support type role. But let me shift to me. I've already said, hey, don't follow my career path, but let me throw out a few principles that I think are valuable regardless of your career path. And they may be kind of routine, and hopefully they are, because I think they're common sense. There are a few things that I thought helped me be a reasonably good steward of this job once it was entrusted to me. And some of these lessons come from childhood and how I was raised. Some of these lessons come from work experience, and some come from more amorphous sources that are hard to put your finger on. The first is know your principles, pay attention to them, and always check back with them. You've got to go into life with a set of principles that guide you, and there will be many opportunities to veer off of that road. Often they will be attractive, easier paths, but seductive as they may be, it's good to resist. It's good to resist. It's good to know, that if your principle is that you want to have confidence in your own work, and you want to have integrity, and you want to treat people with the dignity they deserve, check back with that. That's something that I've taken as a guiding principle and hope I do well with, but it's a task for continuous improvement. The second is, as an analyst, and most of us in financial management at heart really are analysts of one sort or another. I still certainly consider myself an analyst in my role as an assistant to the secretary. As an analyst, have clear eyes. Look very seriously at the facts in front of you. Weigh the facts you see. Blink a couple times and see what the facts are that you don't see. Maybe ask a couple people to try and figure out what you're missing. But then once you've got your hands around the facts that are relevant, call it like you see it. Don't call it the way you think somebody wants you to call it, because that's not placing confidence in others. You may think that when you come in to brief me, I'm looking for a particular answer to the question. Well, if that's what you think, then, and you lead me down that path, then you're not giving me a chance to do better. If you give me the facts as they stand, even if they're distasteful, you're giving me a chance to do better. You're giving me a chance to make the right decision. I would like that chance. And most leaders, I think, would, even if in the moment it might not be quite as comfortable. As an analyst also, I would say it's very important to keep up on the tools, keep up on the skills, because what would pass for acceptable analysis 10 years ago when I was doing economic development consulting 12 years ago, would not pass for acceptable analysis today. The techniques have gotten better. They've democratized. You can do things today with Excel that I couldn't have dreamed of doing. But keep up and apply the best techniques you can. Finally, I'd say, speak truth to power. And this ties in with the first point. As an analyst, there's nothing that's more important than looking at the world and applying your best efforts and calling it like you see it. Again, regardless of what the environment is, that's an empowering sort of thing. The reality is it's a little risky, but I certainly wouldn't be here where I am today without having taken some risks. And while it may not be always the percentage play, in the long run, it's better to be known as someone with integrity who is a solid analyst than to be known as someone who shapes the analysis to fit the person asking the question. A final point, collaboration. We're in an environment that is sometimes fiercely competitive. People are angling for promotions, people are angling for the attention, people are angling for budgets. Often that means keeping ideas to yourself or within a small group and fleshing them out, bringing them forward. I think that may pay off sometimes, but in the long run, it's not the most healthy way for an organization to function. And I'd call your attention back to that point about identifying best practices, standardizing them, and pushing them out. That doesn't work if the best ideas are kept internal. I'm grappling right now on sort of a day-to-day basis with financial services transformation and the many challenges surrounding that. We've been pushing FISOs and pushing the center to do better. There are lots of great practices out there in the financial services side of our business. They're not always shared as effectively as they should be. Part of that is just communications failure, no doubt about it. Part of it is people looking to be the best they can be with not so much focus on whether the person 2 bases away is the best they can be, whether the organization as a whole is the best they can be. We can do better in that regard. I'm not saying people aren't community spirited or not trying to have the organization as a whole go forward, but sometimes we set up competition in ways that are a little less efficient from an overall organizational perspective. Anyway, I promised that I would have I would take some questions and I would pose some questions. Just to warm up, I'll take some questions first and then we'll move to the pose some questions section. Or I guess I can recognize people just as easily. We've got some microphones to go around.
Yeah, we have microphones to go around, and I'll start off with an advanced question, if that's okay.
Ooh. Prior thought.
Of all the lessons learned in your career journey, which is the most memorable?
The most memorable. Ooh. Lessons that are memorable are usually the lessons that you really regret having learned, right? Well, I won't go into too many details, but I will confess that there have been times in my life where I was less well prepared for discussions or meetings than I ought to have been, and learned through very painful personal experience that it was pretty important to have a mastery of the facts. I'm thinking back to my time, one example, one of far too many examples, of my time in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, where I had opportunity to brief the Assistant Secretary on a whole portfolio of issues in actually in the budget process. And I thought I had really figured out this. It was 10 or so issues across an issue team. I thought I'd really figured it out. I'd gone out and met with advocates for a whole bunch of programs across the department, and sat down, gave the briefing, and the very first question, I was completely at sea. And I realized I had a superficial knowledge of all 10 of these issues. And what I hadn't done is figured out what was likely to be important to the secretary, to the other key folks that really cared about these issues, and dig deeper on those. I didn't take the time, didn't make the effort to get to the next level and think about what the questions were that I was going to be asked and what the meaning of those would be. And as a result, I felt like I didn't do a good job. I didn't do a good job of framing the issues, preparing them to make them decisionable. I took that lesson, but I've had to learn it over and over and over again. The way in which I did that when I was working in OSD was different than the way in which I did that when I was doing economic development consulting. It was very different than the way I did that when I was at policy institutes, and it was very, very different from the way I did it when I was on Capitol Hill working with senators and key staff. This runs a little bit in tension with what I said before about remaining true to your principles and being a clear-eyed analyst, but the tension is just sort of superficial. When you get down to it, it's consistent. That is that different audiences require different presentation. Different audiences require tailoring of decision. I don't mean skewing the facts. I mean figuring out what's important, what is relevant, and to a decision maker or to someone you're advising, and tailoring presentation to emphasize that. But that's not a substitute for having the breadth, because you'll be surprised by the questions more often than not. Another question?
Hi, Dr. Morin. Steve Rankin. One of the challenges I perceive to improving financial management and financial management force development is the myopic approaches that we use to sharing information and knowledge management in the career field. What do you envision will be the future construct for FM knowledge management? Do you think it'll be a continuation of communities of practice, an FM-wide wiki, or some other approach?
I think there's a real tension here because different people like to get information in different ways. But it's incredibly painful and time-consuming and resource-consuming to provide information in 15 different ways. I have, in my tenure to date, I've tried not to shift our organization down any one of those particular routes. I was asked when I signed up. So, you're 30-something, you're young, hip. I had to disagree with the hip part. But are you going to be twittering to the workforce? And I had to confess that I did not have a Twitter account, did not intend to have a Twitter account, at least in my personal life, and didn't see terribly much value in communicating in 160 characters or whatever it is. But different people from different generations and from different walks of life like to get information in completely different ways. I am a big believer in the wiki style of information sharing. It's culturally problematic. We've seen this in the intelligence community where they've tried to use this. And there have been some growing pains, but I think it's enormously promising, especially in an environment where people have a degree of accountability for their actions or their edits. But depending on the mission, different things can be appropriate. The Army had some tremendous success in Iraq and Afghanistan with what are really communities of practice, but started out as sort of email listservs on steroids, pushing out the best ideas to company commanders, in harm's way. That we have challenges that are like that. I would love to see, sustained process improvement level engagement between the lieutenants who are running financial services offices, between base budget officers and MAGCOM FMAs. We have some of that in our communities of practice. I don't have a great sense, actually, about how widespread the use really is. I mean, I've seen the stats for membership, but membership and active use can be different things. Oftentimes these sorts of endeavors have a core population, a small number of folks who are really into it. And then the bulk of the users log on a couple times and decide it's not quite their thing. So I'm not going to vote for any one at present because I'm not ready to provide a vector or a strong direction on that. But I do think that a diversity is valuable, even if it is a little more administratively painful. Does that? Okay. Maybe one from the web?
We've got a few from the web. We'll start out first with Lynn from Hill Air Force Base.
Hi, Lynn.
She says, asks, what is the most important thing we as defense workers can do to aid our national security agenda and win the war on terrorism?
The most important thing. Well, we've all got different roles. So let me generalize across all the roles and harken back to something I said in my opening remarks. And that is embracing continuous process improvement. Because those of us in financial management, which is at its heart a support role, we have a job to be efficient and effective in our allocation of the resources the taxpayers entrust to us. And when we're in a wartime environment like we are now, we've got to ensure that we get every ounce of combat capability we can out of every dollar we've got. Now, what does that mean practically? Practically, that means looking at what we're doing, looking what we're spending money on, and when it doesn't make sense, raising your hand. It means looking at new ways to do the things we have to do that concentrate more on tooth and less on tail. It means breaking bureaucratic silos. It means challenging existing power structures to make sure that we're mission focused and that we're pushing every dollar we can forward. It also means don't let the tyranny of what we're doing now drive the resource decisions of the future. You know, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Secretary of the Air Force Chief of Staff, they've all been very clear that we need to rebalance our force. We need to rebalance our efforts to focus on today's fight. Again, getting every ounce of capability we can out of every dollar we spend, and also preparing for a very uncertain future. But that's a day-to-day prioritization challenge. And as financial managers, I think we are incredibly well positioned to do that. I should also add that given the very serious fiscal situation that our nation is in, my view is that the skills of financial managers and the skills of people that have grown up in the FM tradition, even if they are now doing jobs other than financial management, are going to be all the more relevant, all the more crucial. You see this in folks coming out of the FM community being selected for senior positions across the Air Force. You know, Ms. Davis here going off to be the civilian deputy to General Shelton, really providing a critical guidance to the whole Air Force corporate process and the whole Air staff. I think that's a tribute to her skill and the mindset that someone brings from FM. General Larry Spencer going over to J8. These are FMers being identified as having the right skill sets to lead other organizations and to help drive the Air Force or the department as a whole towards a brighter future. Maybe another question from the broader world?
Sure. We've got Tim from AFSOC, and he would like to know what impact has contractor reduction had on the financial management workforce or financial management in general, if any at all?
Well, I've seen some impacts, but I think that's a great opportunity to turn around and switch actually to the me asking questions, because I have seen some of the day-to-day resource balancing challenges, but the reality is the core people surrounding me are all government, civilians, and military, so I'm not living the challenges of contract reduction like other folks might be. So let me ask if anyone in the room wants to raise their hand and throw out ideas on that issue. Mr. Hartley, let's get you to
I think,
wait. Please wait for the mic.
I would say the biggest challenge that we're facing is the immediacy of the transition. The fact that if we are the process of transitioning from contractor to civilian takes some time. You need to build the skill set on the civilian side. So the urgency or the immediacy of that transition is a difficult challenge. So phasing it, timing it right is going to be one that's we got to focus on. And we're not afforded the time we'd need to transition. So you have to be wise about how you pull the folks off the contracts to make sure you preserve that skill set that you're relying heavily on. The second piece that we're facing on our end is the difficulty, what we lose from the standpoint of reach back. And what I mean by reach back is typically when you have one contractor support, one person providing contractor support to your organization, that links you into a whole company's worth of support. And so that reach back is another thing that we're feeling. So we're cautious about how we, once again, how we pick and choose how to downsize and make sure that we don't lose that reach back. And of course what that means is making sure you have the breadth of contractor support that you had. Try to keep the breadth of that contractor support activity you had prior to the downsizing.
Thank you very much. I think that there are a couple other points that I would add to that. Number one is we undoubtedly face some significant challenges with the personnel system. I don't think that there's a reasonable argument that the pendulum had not swung too far towards dependence on contractors. I also think that swinging it back, while necessary, is going to be painful, and one of the biggest areas of pain is going to be the jam it creates on the personnel system. We're also going to be dealing with the repeal of NSPS, which is going to be a substantial muscle movement for personnelists. Those things combine to create a very significant managerial challenge over the next couple of years. But I think in the end, a fresh look at what functions ought to be organic, what functions ought to be civilian, what functions ought to be military, and where we can rely on contractors, which is particularly in areas where the need is transitory or the need is something where the responsibilities are not such to require a government workforce. Those are, relooking that, taking fresh eyes is valuable. But the pain and challenges are going to be real and already are. It's particularly the case because of the way that some of the reductions were initially laid into place is going to fall, unsurprisingly, disproportionately on those organizations that were heavily dependent on contractors. It's simple math. The percentage, if you're 80% contractor, a X percentage reduction in contractors is going to mean a much larger shift of your total workforce. So as a DoD manager, as an Air Force manager, I just need to have my eyes open, and I think people at a whole variety of levels need to have their eyes open to where the pain of transition is going to be most acute and adopt mitigating strategies to minimize it. But there's no question in my mind that we had swung the pendulum too far, and it's time to recenter it.
We have a quick follow-up from the web, somewhat building off of what Mr. Hartley was saying. What has been done to capitalize on the knowledge of contractors before they are released?
We've had a couple instances at my level where we've had to grapple with this question. And honestly, I think it's case by case. It requires good management by local leaders at whatever level. If you're dealing with a situation where you have an entire function that's been outsourced and is now going to come back in, or maybe is going to be, maybe it's an activity we're not going to continue to pursue at all, you're going to have to make some very tough choices. You may not have, due to the delays in the personnel system, any overlap between the termination of the contract and a sufficient number of new people coming on, which is going to make it very, very challenging. But on the other hand, organizations that are using contractors in sort of a classic staff augmentation type way, I think it'll be considerably easier. But I wouldn't want to get too deeply into the specifics of that dynamic, because fundamentally I think it's a local managerial challenge that depends heavily on what function exactly we're talking about and whether that's an enduring role or an area that's being deselected, if you will. Let me turn around and pose one of my questions, and that's about communications. This builds on a question I was asked earlier. We have a whole variety of communications tools available to us that can be put to good purposes or bad, can be used well or poorly. But let me ask folks in this room, if anybody wants to jump in and offer a personal perspective, are we using the right tools to communicate to you? Are we communicating sufficiently? Too little? Too much? Are we communicating on the right topics? Do you know what you need to know in order to get your job done effectively? Colonel Martin. This was a cold call.
I guess I would answer that. I guess it depends. And again, it depends on the situation. But I think for the most part we do. I think as leaders, we try to get information out as much as possible. We listen to our workforce, and they do a good job of pushing information. I think sometimes it depends on the ops tempo. We get wrapped up in the ops tempo sometimes, and that causes a breakdown in communication. But I think for the most part we do, and I think we have good tools of communicating out there. Like you said, different people use different ways to get information. There's some that like to go out there and pull information off the web. There are others that have to have information pushed to them. And again, it's really finding out what your workforce, the way they like to get information, how best to communicate to your workforce, and then how best they can communicate to you. But again, I think it all depends on the situation. But I think overall we do a great job with the communication, and sometimes we have to take that strategic pause, though, when we're really busy to kind of refocus, revector, and ensure that we're getting the right things done at the right time.
Thank you. Colonel Martin knows the really busy question very well. For those of you that don't know him, he's running the FMB engine room, and I think a 14-hour day would be a relaxing one for him. So I'm grateful for your on-the-spot answer, and I know in the press of business, talking can be hard, and that's sort of the reason I thought about calling on you. Complicated organization, there is no shortage of trouble we can get into when we have folks making decisions at the top who haven't gotten the right information from below, and when we have folks at all levels of the organization making day-to-day management decisions, day-to-day resource decisions, who are operating without the guidance they'd like to have. So those are perennial challenges. Let me see here. I had a couple more questions. Let me ask maybe one more. And that is this is a tough question, particularly tough question in an organization that is bureaucratic. And that is, what are we doing right now that in your minds is not value added? What are we doing that we ought not be doing? And then the converse, so you can get into trouble with the first answer, but you can win brownie points with the second one, which is if the rotation of the Earth slowed slightly and you had another hour or two in a day, what would be the additional thing that you as an individual in a job trying to get the work done would add? the thing you would like to be able to take care of that you can't take care of now. Anyone have thoughts? General Price.
Well, one of the things I'd like is a little stability in the program. And you can't always get that, but boy, that would make a big difference in the big scheme of things if we could hold some things constant for a while. And we try and do that with the field. We've gone to an execution plan where we give people a bogey early in the year. They plan to it, and we hold their feet to the fire to make sure they get there. But I'd like to see that expand if we could.
I was sure he was going to say we just need some quality leadership from the assistant secretary level. You could deselect that.
We already have that.
Anyone else have? I think those are very good thoughts, Dave. Anyone else? Anyone from the wider world? Or maybe too early for that.
No responses as of yet, but they do have some additional questions whenever you're ready.
So let me get one more answer from this room, and then we'll take an additional question.
Sir, if I had an extra hour of a day, I would definitely spend that with all the other organizations outside of FM. We are a support organization, as you said, and going to communication, force development. Getting to know what leaders and warfighters and people from other organizations is really important. And the only way to do that is a face-to-face or a phone call and get into their heads and see what they're interested in.
Where would you go first?
Well, my boss has me working for IE, but my background tells me you got to get to the warfighter. So Air Combat Command, Air Mobility Command, talk to the A8s of the world, find out what the resources and the plans and the desires and the key performance parameters, the metrics and capabilities that the Air Force is trying to provide, and then try and align what we're doing or the products that we're seeing to make sure that we're meeting what the warfighter needs is the first place I'd start, and then back my way up through our staff that way.
Thanks. Anyone else have thoughts on that question? They want to either the cuts or the pluses? It's helpful for me to hear these things. We can get a little isolated in the E-ring sometimes. I know that really startles all of you to hear that, but it's good to get the variety of perspectives. Maybe one more question from the field?
I've got one more here if they don't.
Yeah, we've got a question here from Major Wynn at Luke Air Force Base. Could you share your thoughts on any ideas you may have received in how we institutionalize best practices?
Okay, I think we have some processes in place already that vary by sort of our sub-functional area. So a month or two ago, I was out at the FISO Worldwide Conference, bringing together financial service officers, superintendents, key NCOs. A lot of sharing of best practices there. Not as much as I would like, though. There was a degree of routine briefs that probably could have been more helpful based on what I've heard. But we have those in different areas of our business. But the reality is that the pressure of operational requirements, the limits of TDY funds, things like that, make that sort of thing not always not always a feasible solution. So I think I come back to communities of practice. I come back to wiki-type sharing of ideas. But again, the key is not just sharing good ideas. The key is vetting them and figuring out ways to standardize them. And that requires more council-type action, working group-type action, integrated product team-type action, people collecting ideas, vetting them against experience, and then identifying the best, and then standardizing it and pushing it out. Each of those steps has to be in place. I think we might be running a little short on time, but do we have time for one more question, or we have 4 minutes? Take one more question.
Okay, one more question.
Oh, Colonel Coggins.
Sir, I'd like you to share your thoughts on the art of asking why. As financial managers, we're always quick to be the first ones with an answer to something, but drawing on your past experience, those that you've worked with over on the Hill and elsewhere, what are the styles, characteristics, traits that you've seen that help folks cool down to the essence of an issue to help us to think and posture for better answers and better responses?
That's a great question. And I am not the repository of all wisdom on this. I've seen the world from a couple of different perspectives over the years, but I don't have the breadth and depth of experience that some of you in this room bring to the table. But I think you put your finger right on it. It's the asking why. And there are some who say, you should ask why 5 times. You ask why, you get the first level answer. You ask why again, you get a layer deeper until you get down to that root cause. And the Air Force has done a lot to build that into our accident investigations, to build it into our problem solving, build it even into some of our business case analyses and things like that. But it's an art. Knowing how to get to the heart of an issue is an art. I think I'm reasonably good at it, but I always run into people who are clearly great at it. And frankly, our Secretary of the Air Force, Mike Donnelly, is excellent at this. He's not a hugely aggressive questioner, but when you're bringing issues to his attention, he takes in the issue, he vets it against all of the other information that he's taken in other briefings and other discussions throughout his experience, and then he has just a handful of deeply penetrating questions, always delivered in a very calm, straightforward voice, but deeply penetrating questions that force you to analyze your basic principles, force you to analyze the trade-offs that are implicit in what you're saying. So that's the sort. I sort of aspire to that kind of questioning. Those of you that have had the rare privilege of coming to brief me know that sometimes I may be more successful than others, but it is an art. It requires having a sufficient level of substantive knowledge that you don't get snowed, because, and when I say snowed, that implies a level of intention. The reality is, in our business, issues are so often so fast-moving that everybody develops a common capsule understanding of them. And that capsule understanding may or may not actually reflect reality. And when it doesn't reflect reality, because we've boiled down a complicated systems acquisition issue to 3 bullet points, we can make really big mistakes. And there's real danger of groupthink, because when everybody's moving so fast and everybody has a superficial knowledge, we can all nod and say, yes, that's right. I've seen those 3 bullets too. And in fact, we all just had the same pre-brief and saw the same 3 bullets. So that's very dangerous. And there's no alternative to the blinking your eyes, stepping back, and trying to take a clear, fresh look at things, even in the press of business. And that's where the multiple whys can be just so critical. But honestly, that's a continuous improvement opportunity for me, and I think for everybody in FM. You've got to figure out the way to get those fresh eyes, to ask the questions in a way that helps everybody get to the root of the issue, not just the capsule understanding that so often drives our day-to-day business. Great question, Andy. Maybe we can talk further about that in the future. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your attention and your questions and your suggestions. And I will kick it over to Mr. Breeding.
Sadly, sir, it's my responsibility to end today's session. I appreciate so much your speaking and sharing your insights with the group today. And thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for showing up to today's presentation. This concludes the presentation. Thanks to those who had joined us also online on the DCO. I ask that everyone please stand while Dr. Morin leaves.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day and carry on.
If I could remind everyone also, please, if you could fill out your critiques and provide them to us, it helps us with our performance. All.